This is Shaman Weaver Sheila Baker, and I was going to talk about intuition. And I'm the founder of Soar to Success. So I was going to talk about intuition, and then as I was getting ready to do that, I got a hit. I used my intuition and wanted to talk instead about the stories that we tell ourselves, and then we tell other people, and then we live out of those stories, locked into some kind of a trap. Hey, Deb. Locked into some kind of a trap. We can see out, but we just don't know the way through. And so we stop and we go back and we revisit the old story of perhaps incompetence. What we would say is, well, I'm unsure of myself. And, you know, there was a podcast that I did called Uncertainty Feels Like Fear. So if you haven't listened to that, I highly recommend that you do. Because when we don't know something, and particularly when we're living out of an old story that told us, you don't know how to do this, who says you can, and then we bring that story with us and we live it into the present. And that living it into the present means that it's a cellular level. So if you're just joining me, Shaman Weaver Sheila Baker here, and we're talking about old stories and how we live into our old stories. One of the techniques that we'll learn along the way, if you continue to these interactions, is how to morph that into something different. Sometimes the idea of an old story is comforting, you know. Well, I can't do that. I can't drive after dark, for example. And then you live into that old story. Now, if you live in the Pacific Northwest, that means that after about 3:30 in the afternoon in the winter, you're home. And you're going nowhere. Or if you happen to be somewhere, you're not going home because you don't drive after dark. And this is an ingrained belief that we have. We have to keep our porch lights on. This is an old story that we've told ourselves. Now, as spiritual beings, knowing how to use those gifts, you might notice that you might not have to leave your porch light on. You might have it so that the energetics that you create a new story for you. So if it happens that you're living out of an old story, and, you know, are you? And those of you here with me tonight, is there an old story that you're still carrying along? We can talk about it. We can talk about how to get on the other side of that, to write your way. Now, whether that writing means to correct your way or to write it, there's a way to move through the old story into a new story, reinventing yourself. And in the reinvention, you cannot be the person that you were. I posted, and Sheila Says So the other day, that the old identity is invalid. It has no place here any longer. Who you were 2 months ago, who you were last year, for absolutely certain, that's your old story that you're living out and through. So if you catch yourself in that place of whatever was going on last year, now I know it's not very long ago, however, whatever was going on last year is not valid in your life this year. That old story has got nothing to do with you. Now, how cool is that? So let's say you have an old story that you cannot write, that you don't know how to, you don't know how to do it. So that you, out of that old story, you lock yourself out of all kinds of possibilities. So what if you just write that story and cut the cord to it. You don't have to be attached to the things that happened to you in the past. You don't have to, they can be gone. Lobo says, boom, it's just not there anymore. Absolutely. There's no point in, actually living into your old story, telling your old self the old story is really self-abuse. So let that soak in for a moment. And those of us who are here, who are spiritual in this group, we actually don't want to be doing that. We know that we don't want to be doing that. And yet, when you're telling your own story, your own old story to yourself, you're owning it. You're owning it over and over and over on a daily basis. So if you find yourself doing that, if you're ruminating on what used to be, then turn around. I mean, seriously, turn around. Shamanism is full of really absurd things that work. So the act that you stand up, you catch yourself telling the old story. You stand up, you physically turn your body 360 degrees. That's enough to shift the energy. And how simple is that? Now, don't worry if you're finding yourself 400 times a day standing up and turning around. Think about it. If you did that, how many days you're going to do that before it impacts and you begin to notice, oh my goodness, I'm really telling that story a lot. First, that's the awareness. Second, cut down on the number of times that you're doing that. So if you're running your own story, first of all, listen to yourself. So often, I have a friend who says to me, I'll be saying something and it'll be profound. And he says, are you listening to yourself? And so often we don't do that. So if you've just joined me, this is Shaman Weaver. We're talking about dispelling the old story. And, and here we are creating a new myth. So I think that's really beautiful. Out of who we think we are, we create our lives. So imagine yourself being a little bit different than you are right now. What would your life look like then? And begin to craft that in your imagination. One of your number one superior gifts is your imagination. And we don't use it very often. We just are comfortable living in the old story. So now I'm going to invite you to use your imagination, to conjure up, if there were no obstacles in your way, what would your life look like? That's a beautiful place to start. So the old stories no longer serve, and you can now begin to go, wow, if there was nothing in my road, what would my life look like? So thanks a lot for joining me. Have a beautiful evening and blessings on your journey. Bye-bye.